The night has a way of revealing all that the day's noise attempts to conceal. When the sun sets and the traffic thins, the city takes a new breath, slower and more melancholic. It is in this moment that true stories unfold, far from hurried glances. Good night to you who keep me company this early morning. Or perhaps good day, if the sunlight is already streaming through your window. Pull up a stool, adjust your headphones, because today our conversation will touch on places we usually avoid. We will talk about destiny and the strange ways it chooses to cross paths. Imagine an overhead bridge of rough concrete, cold and gray, serving as a roof for those who had lost all their walls. It was there that Amina now lived. At 25 years old, she had been pushed to the margins of life. Without a place to go, without family, and without resources, she gathered the little she had left. Just a worn backpack, an old mat, and a silent stubbornness to keep breathing. The streets are unforgiving, my friends. They harden the heart and freeze the soul. But Amina had something that misery could not steal. She had a striking, profound gaze that seemed to see through the concrete and the smoke of the cars, and she had a piece of charcoal. While the city slept in warm beds, Amina spent her nights awake. She sketched on the yellowed pages of a notebook salvaged from the bin. Her fingers, stained with soot, drew shadows, tired faces, and the crooked outlines of the buildings that rejected her. It was her way of screaming without making a single sound, and it was on one of those chilly nights that destiny decided to make its move. From the top of the expressway, cars sped past, ignoring the invisible lives sheltered under the flyover pillars. But one car, in particular, slowed down. Inside it was a 38-year-old man, owner of a fortune many would spend 3 lifetimes trying to accumulate. His name was Femi. Femi had everything money could buy, but he carried an emptiness in his chest that no bank account could fill. He was returning from another business dinner, surrounded by smiling, empty people, feeling more alone than ever. If you, listening to me now, have ever felt lonely in a crowd, you know exactly what I'm talking about. That feeling that no one knows your true essence. Take advantage of the fact that we are just beginning our reflection today, and subscribe here to the channel. Leave your like, because this small gesture helps our voice reach other hearts that need company in the early hours. The traffic light turned red. Femi leaned his head back on the leather seat of the car and sighed, tired of his routine. Looking to the side, through the glass slightly fogged by the Harmattan mist, his eyes met Amina's. It was a fraction of a second, but time seemed to stop. She was sitting on her mat in worn clothes, holding the notebook against her chest. The yellow light of a distant street lamp illuminated half her face. Femi felt an electric shock run down his spine. It wasn't just the sad beauty of that young woman that paralyzed him. It was the silent dignity in her gaze. A gaze that didn't ask for pity, didn't ask for alms. It just existed, firm and sharp. The light turned green. The driver of the car behind honked impatiently. Femi was forced to accelerate, leaving the flyover behind, but Amina's image remained etched in his mind like a vivid photograph. That night he couldn't sleep. He paced back and forth in his silent mansion. The expensive paintings on the walls seemed lifeless. The luxurious furniture felt cold. He could only think of the dark eyes of that woman under the flyover. The next night, Femi did something that went against all the logic of his calculating world. He dismissed his driver, took the key to the most discreet car in his garage, and drove back to the same intersection. He parked some distance away, on a dark side street, and walked to the edge of the flyover. The wind bit at his face and the smell of wet asphalt filled the air. There she was. Amina was sketching frantically, oblivious to the cold. Femi stood there leaning against a concrete pillar, observing in silence. He noticed the intensity of her strokes, how she rubbed the charcoal on the paper, with a mixture of anger and delicacy. In that exact moment, he saw a talent obscured by extreme misery, a sensibility he didn't find in the chic art galleries he frequented. For 3 consecutive nights, he repeated the same ritual. He just observed from afar, like an intrigued admirer, trying to decipher the mystery of that young woman. He was afraid to approach and break the fragile shell she lived in. You know, sometimes we meet people who change our path without saying a single word. Have you ever experienced something like that? Has your path ever crossed with someone who messed up all your certainties? If you feel this story resonating in your chest, take advantage and write the name of your city or state in the comments below. I love knowing how far our voice can travel to embrace you all. It was on the 4th night that the silence between them was finally broken. The cold was unbearable. The temperature had dropped sharply in the city. Femi couldn't just watch. He walked slowly, with heavy steps, to the space beneath the flyover. In his hands, he carried 2 thermal cups of hot coffee and a packet of fresh agege bread he had bought from a convenience store. As he approached the dim light of the street lamp, Amina stopped sketching. Her body tensed instantly. She pulled her legs in and hugged her backpack, ready to defend herself. On the streets, any shadow approaching in the dead of night is a potential threat. "No need to be afraid," Femi said, maintaining a safe distance. His voice was gentle, almost a whisper, so as not to startle her further. "I have nothing of value," Amina replied. Her voice was hoarse from disuse, but carried an impressive firmness. "You can go. I don't want anything." He countered gently. "I just brought some coffee. The night is really cold." He slowly lowered his body and placed the 2 cups and the packet of bread on a turned-over wooden crate that served as a table. Then he took 3 steps back, showing he had no intention of invading her space. Amina looked at the food, then at the well-dressed man in front of her. The wool coat he wore cost more than she had earned in all her 25 years of life. The disparity between the two was absurd, almost aggressive. "Why are you here?" she asked. Her eyes narrowed, suspicious. "People like you don't frequent under flyovers. People like me are often very empty," he replied, being brutally honest. "I've been passing by here for days. I see you drawing." I became intrigued. Amina pulled the notebook closer to her body, protecting it as if it were her own life. The charcoal stained her thin, pale fingers. "My drawings are not for decorating the walls of rich people," she retorted bitterly. It was the voice of pain speaking, the voice of someone chewed up by society. Femi smiled faintly, a melancholic smile. He wasn't offended. On the contrary, he admired her courage. "I don't want to buy your art," he said, putting his hands in his coat pockets. "I just want to understand what you see that the rest of the world doesn't. Your strokes have so much life, even in this place that smells of death." The comment broke a little piece of the wall Amina had built around herself. She looked at the 3-8-year-old man more closely. There were dark bags under his eyes. He seemed exhausted, not from physical labor, but from soul weariness. She slowly reached out, took the cup of coffee, and took a small sip. The warm liquid went down her throat, bringing a comfort she hadn't felt in months. "You?" Amina asked, clutching the warm cup between her dirty hands. "What do you see that made you descend from your pedestal to talk to a street phantom?" "I don't see a phantom," Femi replied firmly. "I see the first real person I've seen in a long time. My friends." The weight of those words hung in the pollution-heavy air. 2 completely opposite souls, separated by mountains of Naira, but united by the same suffocating loneliness. Love doesn't choose a place to bloom. Sometimes it sprouts on cracked asphalt. Silence reigned between the two for long minutes. Only the distant sound of tires skidding on the overhead expressway filled the early morning. Femi didn't ask any more intrusive questions. He just stood there keeping her company, letting her set the pace. The clock advanced relentlessly, and the early morning deepened. If you also know the pain of carrying talents and dreams that the world seems to ignore, activate the notification bell on our channel. That way, you'll always be notified when a new story comes to meet your heart. And if you dare, share this video with someone you know has a hidden talent and needs encouragement not to give up. Slowly, realizing the man posed no danger, Amina relaxed her shoulders a little. She didn't talk about her past, didn't say how she ended up on the streets. She just opened her notebook on her lap. "I don't have an eraser," she commented in a murmur, her eyes fixed on the page. "When I make a mistake in a stroke, I have to turn the error into a shadow. Life here is pretty much like that." Femi felt a lump in his throat. He took a step forward with extreme caution until he could see the paper. What he saw left him breathless. It wasn't an amateur drawing. It was an incredibly detailed portrait of a stray dog that used to roam the area. There was so much expression in the drawn animal's eyes, so much sadness and hunger, that it almost seemed possible to hear its whimper. "This is extraordinary," Femi whispered, truly impacted. "Where did you learn to use contrast like that?" "The streets teach you everything about contrasts," she replied, turning the old pages. She showed a drawing of the flyover itself, seen from a somber angle, then the face of an elderly man who scavenged for cardboard. On every page, melancholy jumped out. But then, an abrupt movement changed the course of that night. As Amina turned the page, a gust of cold wind shook the notebook, revealing a loose sheet that was hidden at the back. The sheet slipped and fell at Femi's feet. The drawn face turned upwards. He bent down to pick it up. When his eyes landed on the charcoal-stained paper, his heart pounded. It wasn't a landscape. It wasn't a street dweller. It was a portrait of a man leaning against the door of a luxury car, with a lost, sad gaze. The man wore a wool coat. The man was himself. Amina's eyes widened. For the first time that night, she seemed truly terrified. Her heart beat wildly. She tried to snatch the paper from his hands, but Femi held firm in absolute shock. "You were watching me?" he asked, his voice choked with emotion, without taking his eyes off the precision of the drawn strokes. She had captured exactly the exhaustion he felt. Before Amina could find words to justify, a dull roar cut through the sky. It wasn't a car, it was a violent thunderclap, one of those that makes the ground tremble. The wind began to howl with absurd force, lifting dust and refuse from the ground. The smell of heavy rain filled the air. A sudden and brutal summer storm broke over the city without warning. Water began to pour from the sides of the flyover, quickly flooding the patch of ground where Amina kept her mat. The water level rose frighteningly. The puddles turned into small currents, dragging whatever they found. "My drawings," Amina cried, desperate, hugging her notebook and trying to protect her backpack with her body. The muddy water began to wet her feet. Femi acted on pure instinct. He grabbed her arm firmly, but without hurting her. "You can't stay here. The water will rise too much," he shouted, trying to overcome the torrential noise of the rain beating on the concrete. "Come with me to the car now." Amina recoiled, pulling her arm back. Terror was etched on her face. To get into a stranger's millionaire car in the middle of the night, to abandon her corner, however bad it was, to enter a world she didn't know. "I can't leave my things," she cried, the rain washing the charcoal from her hands. "I'll buy you 1,000 new mats," Femi shouted back, desperate to save her, the water already lapping at both their ankles. "But your talent can't be lost in the mud. Please, trust me just this once." A flash of lightning illuminated the dark night, reflecting the desperation in their eyes. The dirty water rose relentlessly, and the flood threatened to carry away not just her old mat, but Amina's small and fragile existence. She needed to make a decision that would change her life forever. The sound of the windshield wipers tried to dictate a rhythm to the chaos outside. Rain lashed violently against the car window. Amina was huddled in the passenger seat, pressed against the door. She held her wet backpack against her chest, as if that worn fabric was her only shield against the world. Femi kept his eyes fixed on the flooded expressway. He could hear the young woman's accelerated breathing beside him. The leather upholstery of the imported car was getting soaked, but he didn't care. His concern was for Amina's knuckles, which were white from how tightly she gripped her belongings. He thought of heading to his house, a mansion with more than 10 empty rooms, located in a gated community, but good sense made him hesitate. Taking a woman who had just emerged from under a flyover to a marble palace would be a grave mistake. It would seem like a cheap display of power, a reality shock that could frighten her and make her flee at the first opportunity. Femi changed his route at the second flyover. He decided to head towards the old part of the city, where the streets were narrower and lined with buildings from another era. In that old sector, hidden among ancient commercial buildings, was a property he hadn't visited in years. It was an old painting studio that had belonged to his great-uncle, the only artist in an entire family of accountants and lawyers. The car parked in front of a brick facade with a large cast-iron door. The rain continued to pour, turning the pavement into a small muddy river. Femi turned off the engine and looked at Amina, trying to convey as much calm as possible through his gaze. The environment was dark, illuminated only by the headlights of the few cars still braving the storm. Amina looked at the old building with evident suspicion. Her striking eyes wandered over the dark facade, looking for hidden dangers in the dim light. Femi quickly got out of the car, braving the downpour to open the heavy lock on the iron door. The key grated in the old lock, protesting against years of abandonment. He pushed the metal sheet open and returned to get Amina, opening the passenger door and extending his hand to her. She refused his hand, getting up by herself and exiting the vehicle with quick steps. Her feet, shod in torn sneakers, sank into the cold water on the pavement before she crossed the building's threshold. Femi closed the heavy door immediately after, isolating the two from the deafening noise of the storm. The silence descended upon them immediately. The air inside the studio had a characteristic smell of old dust, stored wood, and remnants of linseed oil. It was a spacious area, with a very high ceiling and a large glass skylight, through which the flashes of lightning could be seen. Femi sat in a wicker chair on the other side of the fireplace, maintaining a respectful distance. He knew that any sudden movement could break the silent peace agreement they had sealed. He looked at her backpack on the floor, with the drawing notebook peeking out from the broken zipper. The silence lasted a long time, interrupted only by the crackling of burning firewood and the sound of rain on the skylight. Femi decided to speak first, using a low tone of voice, almost as if he feared breaking the fragility of the moment. He explained that the place belonged to his family, but no one had used it for a long time. Amina listened without taking her eyes off the flames. She seemed to process each word carefully, looking for ulterior motives or traps disguised as kindness. Life on the streets had taught her that no one offers anything without charging a high and painful price later. Femi perceived this invisible barrier and was sincere about his past. He recounted that his great-uncle had been very happy in that space, creating canvases that expressed everything he held in his heart. He confessed that he envied that ability to create something real, as his own life was surrounded by numbers, contracts, and empty meetings. These confidences made in the warmth of the fire touch on wounds that many of us carry in secret. If you also have a refuge or a memory you hold dear in your heart, leave your comment below saying the name of your state. It's comforting to see how our stories intersect and find an echo in so many different places across our country. Amina turned her face towards him, and her striking eyes shone in the firelight. She asked why he cared so much about a stranger who lived on the pavement. Her voice had a cutting tone, a protective shell she used not to show her extreme vulnerability. Femi replied that he didn't just see a stranger on the pavement. He explained that he had seen the drawing that had fallen on the floor before the rain started. He confessed that the precision with which she had captured his own loneliness on paper had impressed him more than any expensive artwork he had acquired at elegant auctions. Femi walked to the side wall and flipped an old switch. A soft, yellowish light illuminated the center of the main hall. The place was exactly as his uncle had left it decades ago. There were wooden easels scattered in the corners, long tables stained with dry paint, and piles of canvases covered with white sheets that looked like ghosts in the dim light. If you are following this journey and feel the weight of this silence between two such different people, take advantage of this moment of pause. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next chapters of this story of discoveries. Also activate the notification bell. This way you will always be present when our voice brings new reflections in the early hours. Amina remained standing near the entrance, dripping water onto the dark parquet floor. She looked at the easels with a mixture of astonishment and deep curiosity. The fear on her face began to give way to a silent fascination that she tried to repress at all costs. Femi walked to a mahogany cabinet at the back of the studio. He found some clean towels that had been stored in a sealed plastic bag and a thick wool blanket. He approached slowly, extending the dry fabrics to her, without trying to lessen the physical distance between them. Amina took the towel with hesitation and began to dry her long, dark hair. The worn coat she was wearing was set aside, revealing her narrow shoulders and the fragility of a body that had been poorly nourished for weeks. She wrapped herself in the wool blanket, sitting on the edge of a long wooden bench that was near a workbench. Femi collected some dry firewood that was stored near an old iron fireplace that warmed the studio in winters. He lit the fire with patience, using sheets of an old newspaper he found in a drawer. In a few minutes, the flames began to crackle, bringing a cozy warmth to the grey room. The firelight danced on the studio walls, creating long shadows that mingled with the stacked paintings. Amina extended her trembling hands towards the warmth of the fireplace. Her fingers still bore the black remnants of the charcoal she used to draw under the flyover. If you are rooting for this new beginning and believe that we all deserve a safe space to heal our pains, leave your like on this video. This small gesture helps us continue bringing profound narratives that warm the soul in the quietest hours of the night. On the fourth night, Femi couldn't resist and drove again to the old part of town. He parked the car and walked to the cast-iron door with his heart beating faster than usual. He feared opening the door and finding the space empty, discovering that she had gathered her things and returned to the insecurity of the streets. He turned the key carefully and pushed the metal sheet open. The smell of linseed oil was stronger, mixed with a new aroma of fresh paint. The yellow light was on at the back of the hall, projecting Amina's silhouette against a large canvas positioned in the center of the space. Amina had her back to him, wearing an old cotton shirt that had belonged to his uncle and that she had found in the cabinets. Her hair was tied in a makeshift bun, and she held a long brush with an impressive firmness. She was painting with an intensity that seemed to consume all her energy. Femi approached slowly, stopping a few meters away so as not to interrupt the creative process. He looked at the canvas and felt the air leave his lungs at the force of that image. Amina was painting the flyover itself under the storm. The oil paint strokes were thick and dark, showing the force of the muddy water advancing over the gray concrete. But in the center of the canvas, amidst the chaos of the storm, there were two human figures sketched in shades of white and gold, holding hands, resisting the force of the current. It was the exact representation of the rescue moment. There was so much pain, but also so much hope in that painting, that Femi felt his eyes well up. He realized that Amina was using the old canvases in the studio to purge the suffering she had accumulated during the period she had been invisible to the world. Amina stopped the movement of her brush in the air, noticing his presence without needing to look back. She slowly lowered her hand and placed the instrument on the workbench. She turned to face Femi, and her striking gaze seemed to read the millionaire's deepest thoughts. Amina lowered her eyes to her own soot-stained hands. She revealed in a murmur that drawing was a way to record what people tried to hide behind their expensive clothes. She said she saw many powerful men pass along that expressway with their eyes fixed on emptiness, looking as lost as those who slept on the ground. This profound perception, coming from a 25-year-old woman, hit Femi like a punch to the chest. He realized that the wealth he had accumulated could not mask his emotional exhaustion in front of someone so attentive to detail. A silent complicity began to form between those two distant realities. The storm began to lose strength in the early hours of the morning. The heavy sound of the rain turned into a constant drip in the gutters of the old building. Amina eventually fell asleep on the wooden bench, exhausted by the night's stress and the accumulated fatigue of so many days without proper sleep. Femi slowly got up, without making a sound. He took another dry blanket from the cabinet and covered her carefully, avoiding touching her, so as not to startle her in her sleep. He looked at her face, now relaxed, and noticed the features of a pure beauty that misery had not been able to erase. He spent the rest of the night sitting in the wicker chair, watching over the sleep of the woman who had transformed his night. He thought about how destiny had led him to that flyover, and how his routine seemed distant and insignificant in the face of the intensity of that new reality. When the first rays of sunlight began to pass through the dirty skylight windows, the studio took on a golden hue. Femi silently withdrew, leaving a spare key on the mahogany table, along with a short note, saying she could stay there as long as she needed. He also left an amount in Naira, so she could buy food without needing to ask anyone. For the next 3 days, Femi did not return to the studio. He wanted to give Amina space to understand that the place was a safe haven, not a trap. He spent his days in his corporate office, signing papers and participating in video conferences, but his mind remained focused on the old building downtown. "I didn't use the money to leave," she said with a firm voice, pointing to the Naira notes that remained intact on the mahogany table. "I used the paints that were already here. It was the only thing I needed not to go mad." Femi took a step forward, looking fixedly into her eyes. He explained that the money was hers by right, an advance for the value of the artwork she was creating. He stated that that painting was worth more than any material possession he owned in his luxurious residence. Amina let out a short laugh, tempered with a hint of bitterness. She asked if he intended to put it in a gold frame to show his rich friends as proof of his year-end charity. Distrust was still a live beast within her, ready to attack at any sign of paternalism. Femi accepted the provocation with humility, without defending himself. He approached the table and picked up one of the smaller canvases that were piled on the floor. He looked at Amina and said he didn't care what others thought, as his only desire was to see the light she carried in her gaze transform into real art. The proximity between the two brought a new tension to the studio environment. The 8-year-old millionaire and the 5-year-old woman were separated by an abyss of social experiences, but connected by a sensibility neither could explain in rational words. Amina took a step towards him, and the smell of fresh paint emanating from her clothes seemed to fill the space between their bodies. She looked at Femi's clean hands and then at her own, stained with blue and black. "Your life is perfect, Femi," she murmured, pronouncing his name for the first time with a softness that made him tremble. "Why do you want to mix with the mud I carry on my shoes?" Femi slowly, hesitantly, extended his hand and lightly touched her dirty face. He explained that his life seemed perfect only to those who looked from afar through the windows of big corporate offices. He confessed that he felt he was dying inside a little each day, and that the strength with which she fought for survival had been the only reality shock capable of awakening him from his own stupor. The revelation was interrupted by the insistent sound of a mobile phone vibrating inside Femi's coat. The device's screen lit up the dark room, showing the name of a major audit firm that managed his family's businesses. The outside world was knocking on the door of that refuge, demanding the businessman's presence in his reality of obligations and appearances. Femi looked at the phone and then at Amina, knowing that call represented the beginning of conflicts that threatened to destroy the peace they had begun to build among the canvases and paints of that old abandoned studio. The device's screen continued to glow in the dim light of the old studio. The name of the family's audit firm blinked like an emergency alert. That small electronic device brought the weight of the real world into the refuge they had built. Femi closed his eyes for a second, breathing deeply. He knew exactly what that call meant. His prolonged absences and the cancellation of important meetings would not go unnoticed for long. Amina took a step back, crossing her arms over her chest. Her defensive posture returned instantly, like a conditioned reflex from life on the streets. She knew the sound of trouble approaching very well. "You need to answer," she said, her voice carrying a sudden coldness. "People like you can't hide forever." Femi looked at the phone and with a heavy sigh, slid his finger across the screen. He brought the device to his ear, keeping his eyes fixed on Amina. On the other end of the line, the grave, impatient voice of his older brother, Kunle, echoed through the speaker. Kunle demanded to know where Femi was and why the company car was parked on a dangerous street in the old city center. The family had tracked the vehicle via security satellite. Kunle's tone was one of pure indignation and authoritarianism. "You know, those who accompany me through these early mornings know how suffocating family pressures can be. Often, the people who should support us are the first to demand behavior that doesn't reflect our true essence. If you've ever felt you needed to live a lie to please your family, leave a like on this video. This is our safe space to talk about these invisible pains." "I'm at our uncle's old studio," Femi replied, trying to keep his voice controlled. "There's no need for panic, Kunle. There's no need." His brother's voice rose several octaves, leaking through the phone for Amina to hear. "We have shareholders demanding answers, and you're holed up in a crumbling building. I'm 2 blocks away." Femi's heart skipped a beat. Kunle was arriving. The protective bubble surrounding the studio was about to burst violently. Femi abruptly ended the call and put the phone in his coat pocket. He turned to Amina, feeling a desperate urgency take over his body. He needed to prepare her for what was about to happen. "My brother is coming here," he confessed, his voice tense. "He tracked my car. Kunle can be a difficult person to deal with." Amina showed no surprise, just a profound weariness. She walked to the mahogany table and began cleaning the brushes with a cloth soaked in solvent. Her movements were mechanical, as if she was preparing to return to invisibility. "I'll get my things," she murmured without looking at him. "It was a mistake to think I could occupy a space that doesn't belong to me." "Don't do that, Amina," Femi pleaded, taking a quick step towards her. "This space is mine, and you are my guest. You don't need to run." Before she could reply, the sound of tires screeching to a halt on the pavement broke the street's silence. Immediately after, loud, authoritative knocks echoed on the heavy cast-iron door. Kunle had arrived, and he didn't usually wait for invitations. Femi walked to the entrance with heavy steps. He turned the key in the lock and pushed open the metal door. Kunle entered like a whirlwind, wearing an impeccable suit that contrasted absurdly with the dust and abandonment of the place. The older brother's eyes swept over the room with evident disgust. The smell of fresh paint and dampness seemed to offend his refinement. Then, Kunle's severe eyes fell upon Amina, who remained near the table, wearing the old, stained shirt. The silence that followed was cutting. Kunle looked from Femi to Amina, processing the scene with a mixture of disbelief and revulsion. The clash of worlds was happening there under the yellowish light of the old lamps. "You've completely lost your mind," Kunle declared, his voice laden with venom. "I've spent days covering up your failures on the board only to find you're playing charity in the dirt." Femi felt his blood boil. He placed himself between his brother and Amina, using his own body as a visual shield. He demanded that Kunle mind his words and respect the environment he had just entered. "Respect?" Kunle laughed with scorn. "You abandon your obligations to bring a street dweller into a family property. Do you have any idea of the scandal this would cause if the press found out?" Kunle's words hit Amina like lashes in the dark. All the traumas of rejection, all the cold from nights spent on the pavement, came rushing back at once. She gripped the edges of the table until her knuckles turned white. If you've ever been judged by your appearance or what's in your pocket, you know how deeply those words cut the soul. Take advantage of this reflection and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the unfolding of this story. Also activate the notification bell. Our community is made up of people who see far beyond what money can buy. "She is not a street dweller," Femi retorted, his voice rising dangerously. "Her name is Amina, and she has more talent and sensitivity in a single stroke than you have in your entire bank account." Kunle was not intimidated. He stepped aside, bypassing his brother to face Amina directly. His eyes were cold and calculating, accustomed to evaluating people as if they were worthless financial assets. "I don't know what you did to bewitch my brother," Kunle told her, dripping with contempt. "But people of your type always have a price. Tell me how much you want to disappear before this stains our family's name." Amina felt her stomach churn. The cruelty of those words reminded her why she preferred the company of stray dogs under the flyover. The world of clean, well-dressed people was, in fact, the dirtiest place she had ever known. She let go of the table and picked up her worn backpack from the floor. Without saying a single word in her defense, she began to walk towards the door. She preferred the cold rain and hard asphalt to enduring that look of superiority. "Amina, wait!" Femi shouted, rushing to gently hold her arm. She stopped but didn't look at him. Her whole body trembled with rage and a shame she didn't deserve to feel. Tears threatened to fall, but she was too proud to cry in front of that man in a suit. "Let go of my arm, Femi," she pleaded, her voice sounding like glass about to shatter. "He's right. The mud I carry won't come off with a few clean towels. I don't belong here." "You belong wherever you want to be," Femi replied firmly, ignoring his brother's presence. "I won't let his bitterness destroy what you're building here." Kunle watched the scene with an expression of absolute revulsion. He shook his head negatively, as if witnessing the definitive end of Femi's sanity. He pulled a checkbook from the inner pocket of his jacket with a swift movement. "I knew the situation was serious, but I didn't imagine you were so broken inside that you'd seek solace in the gutter," Kunle snapped. He filled in a large amount, tore off the sheet, and threw it on the floor at Amina's feet. That piece of paper floated in the heavy air before landing on the dark parquet floor. It was the price the elitist society placed on a woman's dignity. It was the cowardly attempt to erase an existence with a few empty figures. We live in a world where many believe everything is for sale. Do you think dignity has a price? Leave your opinion here in the comments, and feel free to write from which city you are listening to me now. I love imagining where our voice is reaching on this cold, early morning. Femi looked at the check on the floor and felt something break inside him. The blind loyalty he had maintained for so many years towards his family crumbled right there. He bent down, picked up the paper, and tore it into small pieces, throwing the remnants into the air. "Get out of here, Kunle," Femi ordered. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried a dark authority he had never used before. "Go back to your empty life. I am no longer part of this charade you call family." Kunle recoiled a step, genuinely surprised by his younger brother's reaction. He adjusted his silk tie, trying to regain his pose of unshakable control. He didn't expect such resistance because of a stranger. "You will regret this," Kunle threatened, pointing a finger at Femi. "When she robs you and runs away, or when the press destroys your reputation, don't dare seek our help." He turned on his heels and walked towards the heavy iron door. His steps echoed through the empty studio, carrying the promise of future problems. The door slammed violently, making the skylight windows vibrate on the ceiling. The silence that returned to the room was heavy and charged with electricity. Femi was breathless. He had just imploded his own corporate life, cutting ties with the only security structure he had known since birth. Amina remained paralyzed, clutching the strap of her backpack. She looked at the shredded papers on the floor and then at the man beside her. He had chosen to defend her. He had sacrificed his own comfort to protect her from humiliation. "Why did you do that?" she asked. Her voice choked, finally letting the vulnerability she had hidden so well show through. "You threw your life away because of a woman who lives under a flyover." "I didn't throw my life away," Femi replied, taking a slow step towards her. "I just got it back. That world Kunle came from is a prison disguised as privilege." He slowly, hesitantly, raised his hand and lightly touched her dirty face. It was a touch filled with reverence, as if she were the most precious work of art he had ever seen. Amina didn't flinch this time. She closed her eyes, allowing herself to feel that unexpected human warmth. The moment between the two was delicate, a fragile balance built on the wreckage of a painful confrontation. The social tension had been brutally confronted, but Amina's internal wound still bled. The fear of abandonment was still a constant whisper in her ear. If you're rooting for these two souls to find peace after such a storm, don't forget to share this video with that person who always believes in the power of second chances. Your help is very important for our voice to continue spreading these stories on restless nights. Amina opened her eyes and looked at the oil-painted canvas that was in the center of the studio. The depiction of the flyover and the rain seemed even more vivid after the confrontation with Kunle's raw and cruel reality. She realized that, for the first time in many years, someone had truly fought for her. However, her mind was a sea of insecurities. She knew the rich brother's fury would not end there. Powerful families do not usually accept silent defeats. and her life, already difficult, would turn into an even greater hell. Femi noticed the shadow of concern crossing her gaze. He held Amina's cold hands in his, trying to convey a sense of security that he himself didn't know if he could maintain in the long term. He needed a plan, and fast. "We can't stay here for too long," Femi whispered, breaking the silence. "Kunle will try to remove me from the company board. He'll use your presence to declare me unstable, then you need to go to him and fix this," she replied, trying to pull her hands back. "Say it was a momentary lapse. Say you sent me away. I'll go back to the streets. I'll manage. I'd rather lose everything than lose you to the streets again," he said with a sincerity that completely disarmed her. "We need to leave the city, at least until the dust settles, and I can reorganize my assets." The idea of fleeing seemed absurd to Amina. She had nothing to lose, but he was risking an empire. Guilt began to settle in her chest, heavy and suffocating. She was being the trigger for the destruction of the man who had extended his hand to her. But destiny has a way of playing tricks on rainy early mornings. As Femi and Amina tried to decide their next step, his phone vibrated again in his coat pocket. This time it wasn't Kunle. It was a text message from an unknown number that contained only a photo. Femi took the device and opened the message. Upon seeing the image on the screen, all the blood drained from his face. He released Amina's hands, staggering slightly backward, as if he had been punched in the stomach. The shock etched in the millionaire's eyes was terrifying. The phone screen shone in the studio's darkness. The device's cold light reflected on Femi's pale face. He stared at the received image with wide eyes and bated breath. It was a photograph taken from outside the building. The image showed the exact moment he had touched Amina's face. Through the dirty window pane, the camera had captured the intimacy of their touch and their vulnerability. Immediately below the image was a short, direct text message. The words were like razors, cutting through the little peace they had achieved. The message stated he had 12 hours to resign from the company's presidency. Otherwise, the photo would be sent to all the country's sensationalist tabloids. The headline suggested by the blackmailers was written right below. It said that the billionaire heir had gone mad and taken a street dweller into the family's properties. The whole world would know. His reputation would be destroyed publicly, and Amina's image would be exposed in the worst possible way. She would be judged, humiliated, and treated as a fleeting scandal to fuel public curiosity. You know, my friends, human malice doesn't usually take holidays. When someone decides to destroy your peace, they use your greatest weaknesses against you. If you've ever been the target of gossip or lies that tried to tear down your life, leave a like on this video. This is our sign that we've survived the world's malice and are still standing. Femi felt his legs weaken. The weight of an entire empire was collapsing on his shoulders. He took a step back, leaning against the old wooden table to keep from falling. "What is it, Femi?" Amina asked, noticing the drastic change in his expression. Her voice was laden with growing apprehension. She took a step forward, trying to see the phone screen. Femi hesitated for a second, but he knew he couldn't hide the truth from her. He turned the device, allowing her to read the cruel message and see the stolen photograph. Amina froze. The blood drained from her face, making her pale freckles even more evident. Her striking eyes, which once carried a spark of hope, now overflowed with pure panic. The past humiliations screamed in her mind. She knew how rich people treated those they considered inferior. She would be the cause of that man's ruin, the dirty piece that broke the perfect machinery of high society. "We were followed," Femi murmured, his voice hoarse with shock. "Kunle didn't just come here to fight. He must have brought someone to record everything and use it against me on the board." Amina began to shake her head from side to side. Her breathing accelerated uncontrollably. She picked up her worn backpack from the floor with abrupt, clumsy movements. "I need to go," she said, her voice choked with desperation. "If I disappear now, you can say it was a mistake. You can say you sent me away and keep your life." Femi held her wrists firmly, but without hurting her. He prevented her from running towards the iron door. He was not going to allow her to return to the cold, dangerous nights under that concrete flyover. "They don't just want my resignation," he said, looking deep into her eyes. "They want to destroy me emotionally. If you walk out that door, they will come after you to ensure I have nothing left." The cruel truth hit Amina squarely. She was no longer invisible. By crossing paths with that millionaire, she had become a visible and vulnerable target in the power game of people she didn't even know. Good night to you who are listening to me now, perhaps lying in bed, unable to close your eyes. Life often takes frightening turns when we least expect it, doesn't it? Take advantage of this moment of reflection and subscribe to our channel, Be a part of this nocturnal family, activate the bell, and never again spend early mornings in solitude. The tense silence in the studio was broken by the sound of a new thunderclap. The storm outside threatened to return with full force. The weather seemed to reflect the storm forming within the hearts of those two human beings. "I have a property in the interior," Femi announced, making a quick decision. "It's an isolated country house, far from any cell signal or prying eyes. No one in my family has been there for over 15 years. Amina looked at him incredulously. The idea of fleeing the city seemed crazy. She had no documents, no suitable clothes, and didn't fully trust that terrifying scenario. "We need to leave the city right now, before daybreak," he insisted, releasing her wrists to grab the car keys. "If we stay here, the press will cordon off this block before breakfast." Amina's survival instinct took over. The streets had taught her that when danger approaches, the only option is to move. She nodded, clutching the strap of her backpack against her lean body. They took almost nothing. Femi turned off the studio lights, leaving the newly started painting behind, plunged into darkness. He carefully opened the iron door, checking the wet street to ensure there were no photographers hidden in the shadows. The street was deserted. Only a fine drizzle fell on the dirty puddles. They ran to the car, quickly got in, and locked the doors. The sound of the engine starting roared in the silent early morning. Femi accelerated. The car cut through the streets of the old town, fleeing the yellow streetlights. He took the road towards the expressway, leaving behind the corporate world that had shaped him and now betrayed him. The journey to the expressway was made in absolute silence. The radio was off, and the only soundtrack was the noise of the tires cutting through the water accumulated on the asphalt. The tension inside the vehicle was almost palpable, weighing on both their shoulders. As the city lights began to fade behind them, replaced by the total darkness of the road, Femi felt a tightness in his chest. The adrenaline began to subside, giving way to a frightening sense of emptiness. He was losing everything he had built over 20 years of exhaustive work. You know what's most curious about life? Sometimes, we need to lose control of everything to discover who we truly are. If you've ever started life from scratch with nothing but the clothes on your back, leave a comment here saying the name of your city. I want to know where the warriors are who restarted when their world seemed to collapse. Amina noticed the change in his posture. Femi's hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles were white. His breathing was uneven, and a bead of cold sweat trickled down his temple, even with the air conditioning on. The millionaire was suffering a panic attack. The 8-year-old man, always so confident and in control of everything, was crumbling before the unknown. Real life, raw and crude, was exacting its price. Amina acted on instinct. The girl who had survived hunger and cold knew how to deal with despair. She dropped her backpack, stretched out her arm, and placed her paint-stained hand over Femi's trembling hand. "Breathe deeply," she said with a calm, firm voice. "Look at the road. Don't look back. What's left in the city no longer matters now." Her touch was like an anchor. Femi swallowed hard, drawing in air with difficulty. The warmth of her hand on his broke the spiral of catastrophic thoughts invading his mind. "They're going to take the company from me," he confessed in a choked whisper. "I dedicated my entire life to that place. I don't know how to be anything else." "You are the man who stopped his car in the rain to save a stranger's drawings," she replied, squeezing his hand gently. "That man has far more value than any company president." Her words struck deep into Femi's heart. For the first time in his life, someone wasn't evaluating him by the size of his bank account. There, on that dark road, he was just a vulnerable man, being supported by a woman of extraordinary strength. The journey lasted about 4 hours. The sky began to lighten, revealing shades of gray and orange on the horizon. They had ascended to the high plains, leaving the pollution behind and entering a region surrounded by dense bush and morning mist. The car turned onto a laterite road, shaking slightly with the potholes. Mud splattered onto the imported vehicle's immaculate paintwork, marking the definitive transition between the world of luxury and the rustic refuge. At the end of the laterite road was an old, rusty wooden gate. Femi stopped the car and got out to open the passage. The chilly air of the high plains hit his face, bringing a strong scent of pines and wet earth. The property was extensive and isolated. In the middle of a large, untended lawn, stood a stone house with a dark roof and a brick chimney. The place seemed asleep, holding stories of a time when Femi's family still valued moments of rest. If you are rooting for these two tired hearts, don't forget to share this video with that friend who loves stories of triumph and romance. Our voice only gains strength when you help spread these reflections through the early hours. They entered the house in silence. The smell of mold and dust filled the rooms. The furniture was covered with white sheets, giving the large living room a ghostly appearance. The wooden floor creaked with every step. Femi left the keys on a dusty sideboard and let out a long sigh. He looked around, feeling the weight of the isolation. There was no internet, telephone signal was non-existent, and the silence of the surrounding bush was almost deafening. He took off his expensive coat and threw it over a covered armchair. The cold inside the house was worse than outside. Femi seemed lost in his own property, unsure what to do next, paralyzed by physical and mental exhaustion. But Amina didn't freeze. The 5-year-old girl, accustomed to turning chaos into shelter, took control of the situation. She dropped her backpack on the floor and began removing the sheets from the sofas, folding them quickly. "Where's the kitchen?" she asked, rolling up the sleeves of the old shirt she was wearing. Femi pointed to a stone arch at the back of the room. He watched fascinated and ashamed as that fragile woman took the lead. In a few minutes, she opened the heavy wooden windows, letting the pale morning light and fresh air into the house. She found firewood stacked at the back of the kitchen and brought it to the living room. With a skill that only necessity teaches, she arranged the logs in the stone fireplace and lit the fire. Soon the warmth began to chase away the icy dampness from the room. "Sit here," she ordered gently, pointing to the thick rug in front of the fireplace. Femi obeyed in silence. He sat on the floor, stretching his tired legs. The fire crackled, bringing a primitive and essential comfort. He looked at Amina, whose face was now illuminated by the flames, looking like a protective entity that destiny had placed in his path. "I shouldn't have brought you into this mess," he murmured, looking at his own empty hands. "I wanted to save you from the streets, and I ended up bringing my personal hell into your life." Amina sat beside him, hugging her knees. She didn't flinch at the guilt-laden declaration. Her striking gaze met his, conveying a calm he deeply envied. "The streets were my hell," she replied firmly. "Here we have a roof, we have fire, and we have no neighbors. For me, Femi, this is paradise. The rest we will figure out later." Her simple, honest words disarmed the millionaire. The perception of wealth and poverty had completely inverted. In that moment, without his empire and his money, he realized that she was infinitely richer than him. She had resilience, and he only had fear. The first hours of their cohabitation in the country house were revealing. While Femi fought against his own demons and the abstinence from his frantic routine, Amina flourished in the silence. She cleaned the dust, found old but well-preserved provisions in the pantry, and made strong coffee on the wood stove. The smell of fresh coffee permeated the house, bringing a sense of normalcy that neither had experienced in a long time. Femi drank the warm liquid, feeling hope slowly return. Her companionship was a balm for the wounds opened by his own family's betrayal. Often, the cure we seek is not in expensive clinics or international trips. The cure is often in shared silence with someone who understands us without judging. If you agree with this, leave a heart in the comments, so I know we are on the same wavelength this early morning. The afternoon quickly fell over the high plains, bringing with it a biting cold and a thick mist that swallowed the stone house. They lit some old lanterns they found in the cabinets, creating a cozy and intimate atmosphere. Sitting on the living room floor, eating cabin biscuits stored in airtight tins and drinking the remaining coffee, they finally started talking for real. The social masks had fallen completely. There was no president and no street dweller. There were just Femi and Amina. She told him how she had ended up on the streets. She spoke about losing her mother at 17, about the debts she couldn't pay, and about how the big city swallows the helpless without mercy. She talked about the drawing notebook, which was the only inheritance left from the father she never knew. Femi listened in absolute silence. Each word of hers was a punch to his stomach. He had spent his entire life fighting for profit margins, while people like her struggled just to exist until the next day. Shame for his own social blindness took over him. In return, he spoke about the loneliness of growing up in a cold mansion. He spoke about the weight of his father's expectations, about how his brother Kunle had transformed into a ruthless and cruel man. He confessed that the only time he had felt alive in recent years was when he saw her sketching under the flyover. The connection between the two deepened with each revelation. One's wounds found comfort in the other's scars. The love that was blossoming between them was not a movie romance. It was a love forged in pain, loss, and the desperate need for belonging. When night finally took over the bush, exhaustion overcame them both. Amina fell asleep on the living room sofa, wrapped in a thick blanket. Femi stayed awake a little longer, feeding the fireplace and watching her serene face in sleep. He felt that, For the first time in his life, he had something real to fight for. However, the bubble of peace was about to burst. The real world never forgives those who try to escape its clutches. The next morning, the sun struggled to break through the high plains mist. Femi woke early and went to the car to get a toolbox from the boot. As he opened the vehicle's door, the radio, which had been left on in the ignition, automatically tuned into a local news station. The sound of the announcer invaded the silent morning. Femi stopped in his tracks, paralyzed by what he was hearing. The news wasn't about a simple corporate resignation or a family scandal. The situation had escalated into a much worse nightmare. The journalist's grave voice announced that a warrant for preventative arrest had been issued against the former president of the large company. The accusation was of millionaire fraud and diversion of funds. Kunle had not just leaked the photo. He had set up a perfect scheme to incriminate his own brother and send him to jail. The announcer stated that Femi was a fugitive and that authorities were searching throughout the state. He had become public enemy number one, a criminal wanted nationwide. The empire he built was now the weapon pointed at his head. The shock was so violent that Femi let the keys fall onto the wet grass. He had no way to defend himself. His bank accounts must have been frozen, and any attempt at contact would result in his immediate location by authorities. He was cornered. Before he could reason about the next step, the sound of a powerful engine ripped through the silence of the laterite road. It wasn't a common car. The loud, heavy noise indicated the rapid approach of large vehicles, probably identified vans. Femi turned his face towards the gate. Through the thick mist, he saw strong headlights cutting through the cold morning. His heart pounded. The isolated property had been discovered. The refuge had turned into a trap, and he had nowhere to run. The headlights cut through the thick high plains mist like shining blades. The heavy sound of engines tore through the cold morning silence. Femi remained paralyzed near his car, feeling the dew wet his leather shoes. The first van broke through the mist barrier and stopped abruptly in front of the old wooden gate. It wasn't the dark-suited thugs he expected to see. They were immense police vans, sirens off, but with red and blue lights spinning frantically. The state police had arrived. The preventative arrest warrant wasn't just a threat on the radio. Kunle had activated all the shady contacts he had to ensure the hunt was quick and merciless. To run would be to sign his own sentence of guilt. If he disappeared into the bush, the next day's newspaper headlines would declare him a fugitive criminal. Kunle would definitively assume the presidency, and the truth would be buried forever under a mountain of false reports. More than that, fleeing meant dragging Amina into a life of relentless pursuit. She would become a fugitive again, hunted not just by hunger, but now by the entire state. He couldn't let that happen. Femi dropped the toolbox on the wet ground. He turned on his heels and ran back to the stone house. The solid wooden door slammed shut behind him with a thud that echoed through the empty room. Amina was standing near the fireplace. She held a heavy piece of firewood in her hands, ready to fight. Her face was tense, and her dark eyes conveyed the same panic as a cornered animal. "They've arrived," she whispered, her voice trembling. "We need to go out the back. I saw a path that goes up the hill. We can shake them off up there." "We are not running," Femi replied firmly, walking quickly towards her. He carefully took the piece of firewood from her hands and placed it on the floor. "What are you saying?" she asked incredulously. "They'll arrest you. They'll put you in a cell and throw away the key for a crime your brother committed." Femi held her shoulders, looking deeply into the young woman's striking eyes. He needed her to understand the gravity of the situation. He needed her to be his salvation, but in a way she didn't yet imagine. "If I run, Kunle wins," he explained. His voice rushed. "The police don't know you're here. My brother hid your existence because he didn't want the press to know that the billionaire heir was accompanied by a woman who lived on the streets. That would spoil the image of a crazy, lonely executive he painted of me." Amina shook her head, refusing to accept it. Her whole life she had seen people flee from the police. On the streets, no one trusts justice, because justice often wears blindfolds only when it suits the rich. Many times in life, we need to face our biggest storms head-on. If you've ever had to stand still and face a giant problem when all you wanted to do was run, leave a like on this video. This is a space for those who know the weight of fighting the right battle. Femi wasted no more time. He walked to the center of the living room and knelt on the large, thick rug. He pulled the tapestry aside, revealing the ancient, wide wooden floorboards. He used his hands to tap on 3 different boards until he heard a hollow sound. With firm fingers, he found a small crack in the wood and pulled hard. The board came loose, raising a fine cloud of dust settled for decades. Amina approached, observing the scene with curiosity and fear. Inside the hole in the floor, there was a dark metal box, secured with a small padlock. Femi took out a silver key he wore hanging on a chain around his neck and opened the box. Inside was a modern flash drive and a leather-bound notebook. Femi took the two objects and stood up, returning to Amina's side. The siren of one of the police vans briefly blared outside, announcing that the officers were forcing open the gate. "I always knew Kunle wasn't trustworthy," Femi confessed, handing the objects to her. "3 years ago, I started investigating the company's parallel accounts. Here are the proofs of all the diversions, money laundering, and bribes my brother paid using my name as a front." Amina looked at the small digital object and the notebook. It weighed almost nothing, but it contained the power to destroy an empire or save an innocent man's life. Her hands trembled slightly. "Why didn't you hand this over before?" she asked. Her voice choked. "Because he's my blood," Femi replied with profound sadness. "I thought I could fix him. I was a coward, but now we have no more time." The sound of tires skidding on the wet lawn indicated that the police vans had surrounded the house. Deep voices shouted orders from outside. The siege was closed. Have you ever felt betrayed by someone you blindly trusted? The pain of betrayal from your own blood is a wound that takes a long time to heal. Subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell. Our community understands these invisible scars that life leaves us. Femi took Amina's worn backpack and placed the flash drive and the notebook at the bottom, covering them with her few old clothes. He closed the zipper and placed the backpack on the young woman's shoulders. "You need to leave through the back door right now," he instructed, pointing to the kitchen. "Run into the bush and don't look back. Stay hidden until they leave with me." "Don't ask me to leave you," she cried, tears finally washing her pale face. "They'll hurt you. You don't know the system. Rich people who fall from grace don't survive in there." "I'll be fine," he lied, trying to smile to comfort her. "You need to go back to the city. Look for a barrister named Olajide. His office is downtown. He was my father's partner. He's the only man in the corporate world who can't be bought." The front door suffered the first impact. Someone was hitting it with something heavy, trying to break the lock. The noise made Amina jump with fright. Time was up. Femi held Amina's face with both hands. He wiped her tears with his thumbs, feeling her soft skin beneath the charcoal and dust. He looked at her with an intensity that made the surrounding world disappear. "You pulled me from my invisible prison, Amina," he said in an emotion-laden whisper. "You showed me I was still alive. Now, I need you to be my freedom. I entrust my life to you." He didn't wait for a reply. Femi leaned his face in and kissed Amina's lips. It wasn't a planned, perfect movie kiss. It was a desperate touch, salty with tears, full of unspoken promises, and a love that had been born amidst the rubble. The second thud on the front door made the wood crack. Amina understood that there was no point in arguing. If she stayed, she would be arrested along with him, and the evidence would be seized and destroyed by Kunle's contacts. She took a step back, clutching her backpack strap. She nodded, her eyes flashing with a determination Femi had never seen before. The fragile girl from under the flyover was a thing of the past. She turned her back and ran to the kitchen. The back door creaked open, and she disappeared into the thick mist of the backyard. Seconds later, the front door completely gave way, falling with a violent crash onto the living room floor. 6 armed police officers stormed the house. Their rifles and pistols were pointed at Femi. Strong flashlight beams swept the dusty room, blinding the millionaire. Femi did not raise his hands immediately. He maintained a straight posture, chin up. He didn't look at the weapons, but rather at the stone arch leading to the kitchen, making sure Amina had managed to escape. "Femi Adebayo, you are under arrest," shouted the operation commander, advancing across the living room rug. "Hands on your head now." He obeyed calmly. He lay on the cold floor, feeling the metal handcuffs tighten violently around his wrists. The officers roughly lifted him and dragged him out of the house. The reality shock was brutal. The man who once dictated the direction of the financial market was now treated as a common criminal. Hidden behind the thick trunk of a pine tree at the edge of the bush, Amina watched everything. Her heart beat so hard it felt like it would burst from her chest. She saw Femi being pushed into the back seat of the police van. The fine rain began to fall again, mixing with her tears. She saw the door of the police van slam shut. The sirens were switched on, aggressively tearing through the silence of the high plains. The convoy turned around on the lawn and sped away down the laterite road. Do you know the feeling of seeing your whole world leave without being able to scream? Many people lose the loves of their lives due to forces greater than their own will. If you understand this silent pain, comment here the name of your city or state. I want to know how far our connection is reaching on this cold early morning. The noise of the police vans gradually faded until the high plains returned absolute silence to the property. The front door of the house had fallen open, exposing the wound of the invasion. Amina remained motionless for a long time, waiting to be sure no one had been left behind. When the cold began to freeze her fingers, she emerged from hiding. The mission she carried on her back was much greater than herself. She needed to return to the asphalt, to the chaos of the city that had always rejected her. Amina began to walk. She did not follow the main laterite road, fearing she might encounter lingering police vans. She used paths opened by animals in the dense bush, descending the high plains in a tortuous and tiring manner. Branches scratched her arms, mud dirtied her torn sneakers. Hunger began to gnaw at her stomach, but she did not stop. Femi's face, being handcuffed, wouldn't leave her mind, serving as fuel for her tired legs. It was long hours of walking until she spotted the asphalt expressway below. The rain had stopped, but the sky remained laden with dark clouds. Amina descended the slippery embankment and reached the shoulder of the expressway. Lorries sped past, raising dust and dirty water. She stretched out her thumb, trying to hitch a ride. No one stopped. Prejudice dictated the rules of traffic. A dirty woman in old clothes by the roadside was seen as a threat or invisible refuse. After more than 2 hours of waiting, the sun was already beginning to set on the horizon. An old cargo lorry that belched black smoke from its exhaust pulled over to the shoulder. The driver was an elderly man, his face marked by time and sleepless nights. Often, help comes from those who have the least. The most humble usually have the biggest hearts because they know the pain of needing someone and finding only emptiness. Share this video with that friend of yours who always extends a helping hand, even when their own life is difficult. Amina climbed into the high cab of the lorry. She thanked him with a nod. The driver didn't ask questions. He offered her a thermal flask of coffee and a piece of bread wrapped in a napkin. She ate in silence, feeling her strength return. The journey back to the capital took the entire night. The monotonous movement of the lorry helped Amina think. She knew the big city was a mined territory. The police and Kunle's men must have been on high alert. At dawn, the lorry dropped her off at a fuel station at the capital's entrance. The smell of pollution and hot asphalt invaded her nostrils. Amina was back in the place where she had almost lost her soul, but this time she had a powerful reason to be there. She spent the little naira that was left at the bottom of her backpack to buy a municipal bus ticket. The danfo was packed with sleepy workers. She squeezed herself to the back, hugging her backpack against her chest, feeling the hard shape of the flash drive through the fabric. The danfo crossed the city until it reached the central district. Mirrored skyscrapers dominated the landscape. It was there that money flowed, far from the dark flyovers. It was there that lives were decided at luxurious boardroom tables. Amina got off at the stop near the address Femi had memorized and given her. She walked along the busy pavements, dodging hurried men in suits who didn't even glance at her face. She found the number on the facade of an old, but very well-maintained, commercial building. It wasn't a modern high-rise. It was a dark granite building with heavy windows. Barrister Olajide's office was on the 10th floor. Amina's heart quickened. She was a few steps away from fulfilling the promise. All she had to do was enter, find the right man, and hand over the documents. Femi's freedom was just an elevator ride away. She crossed the street, taking advantage of the red light for cars. Her feet were sore, and physical exhaustion was taking a heavy toll, but hope spoke louder. She stepped onto the building's pavement, feeling relief wash over her chest. However, as she was about to push the building's revolving glass door, a detail caught her attention. The streets had taught her to read the invisible signs of danger. She felt a shiver run up her spine. Amina stopped abruptly. She looked through the reflection of the building's revolving glass door. Parked on the other side of the street, in a prohibited spot, was a black car with tinted windows. It wasn't a common vehicle. It was the same imported model she had frequently seen in the parking lots of large corporations. The passenger window slowly rolled down, revealing a very familiar face. It wasn't the police. It wasn't Barrister Olajide. A man wearing an impeccable grey suit observed her from afar. His eyes were cold and carried a cruel smile of victory. It was Kunle, Femi's brother. He was there waiting. He had not gone to the high plains. He knew that if there was any hidden evidence, Femi would find a way to send it to the only lawyer he trusted. Kunle had set the final trap right at the door of salvation. The air left Amina's lungs. She was alone, tired, and surrounded. Kunle raised a walkie-talkie to his mouth, without taking his eyes off her. Amina realized that 2 men in black suits began to walk briskly towards her, emerging from the corners of the same pavement. She was cornered with the evidence of Femi's innocence in her hands. The big city air suddenly seemed heavy, dense, almost impossible to breathe. Amina stood on the busy pavement of the financial center. The two men in dark suits approached with long strides, blocking her escape routes. On the other side of the street, inside the imported car, Kunle observed her with an arrogant smile. He was absolutely sure he had won. In the mind of that powerful man, a woman who lived on the streets was nothing more than an insect, easy to crush. Amina's most primitive instinct screamed for her to run. Her legs trembled, and the urge to flee to the dark alleys she knew so well was almost overwhelming. But then the image of Femi being handcuffed on the cold floor of the country house invaded her mind. He had sacrificed his own freedom to protect her. He had thrown away an entire empire just to ensure she would not suffer again. Fleeing now would be the greatest betrayal. Amina took a deep breath, filling her lungs with the polluted air of the expressway. The frightened girl who hid under the flyover was a thing of the past. An unknown strength, forged in pain and resilience, took over her body. You know, my friends of the early morning, there is a moment in life when fear loses its validity. It is that exact second when we realize we have nothing left to lose, except the person we love. If you have ever found that absurd courage within your chest, leave a like on this video so I know you understand me. Instead of backing down, Amina made the decision Kunle least expected. She clutched the strap of her backpack, raised her chin, and walked directly towards the black car. The two thugs stopped for a second, confused by the offensive reaction of that frail woman. She crossed the street outside the pedestrian crossing, forcing cars to honk and swerve around her. The noise drew the attention of people hurrying by on the pavements. Amina stopped exactly beside the passenger door of Kunle's car. The arrogant smile vanished from the executive's face. He frowned, irritated by her audacity. He made a hand gesture, and the two men in suits quickly approached, stopping less than a meter from Amina. She didn't show an ounce of intimidation. She looked at her own feet and noticed she was standing exactly over a street gutter grate, a deep, dark, filthy drain where rainwater flowed down into the city's entrails. Amina opened the zipper of her worn backpack with slow, precise movements. She reached deep into the bag and pulled out the small, dark metal flash drive. She held it firmly between her thumb and forefinger, extending her arm and positioning her hand exactly over the slits of the drain grate. Kunle's eyes widened. The blood drained from his well-groomed face. That small digital object held the keys to his ruin or his absolute success. "Make your dogs back off," Amina said, her voice coming out firm, loud, and clear, overriding the traffic noise. "If they take one more step towards me, I'll open my fingers, and the only proof of your innocence will rot in the gutter." The thugs hesitated, looking at Kunle for orders. The executive swallowed hard. He rolled down the car window completely, staring at Amina with a mixture of hatred and profound shock. "You're crazy," he hissed, his voice trembling with contained rage. "You don't know who you're dealing with, girl. I can end your life with a snap of my fingers." Amina gave a dry laugh, a laugh that carried the baggage of years sleeping rough. She looked directly into the cold eyes of Femi's brother. "Do you think I'm afraid of threats?" she replied without averting her gaze. "I know hunger. I know true cold. I survive where you wouldn't last 2 hours, Kunle. My life has already been destroyed and rebuilt several times. You have nothing that can scare me." Her words clashed head-on with his arrogance, breaking the shell of superiority that money provided him. Kunle didn't know how to negotiate with someone who didn't covet his wealth. Good night to you who are listening to me and know how to recognize true power. Money can buy many things, but it will never buy the dignity of someone who knows their own worth. Take advantage of this moment and subscribe to our channel. Activate the notification bell so that our voice can be your companion on the most solitary nights. "What do you want?" Kunle asked, his voice losing strength, desperation showing through. "Name your price. I'll pay triple what my brother promised you." "I don't want your dirty money," Amina replied with disgust. She used her free hand to point upwards towards the facades of the surrounding buildings. "We are on the city's main expressway," she continued, using the cunning the streets had taught her. "There are 4 banks on this corner. There are at least 10 security cameras pointed directly at this car right now. If your security men lay a finger on me, you won't be able to hush up the scandal." Kunle looked around, sweating coldly. He noticed that dozens of people were already stopping on the pavements to observe the unusual scene. The discretion, which was his greatest weapon, had gone down the drain. He was completely cornered. "I want you to pick up that phone right now," Amina ordered, her hand still dangerously suspended over the drain. "Call your contacts in the police, withdraw all charges and cancel Femi's arrest warrant." Say it was a system error. Do what you have to do, but clear his name now. Kunle gripped the steering wheel of the car so hard that his knuckles turned white. He was being defeated in the middle of the street by a woman in old clothes and torn sneakers. The humiliation was unbearable, but the fear of losing control of the company was even greater. He picked up the mobile phone from the car's console. With trembling fingers, he dialed a number and brought the device to his ear. Amina watched his every move, without blinking, and without moving her hand from the drain. She heard Kunle stammer orders to an influential DPO, demanding that the operation in the high plains be aborted and that the records be erased immediately. He used his usual authoritative tone, but Amina could see the defeat shining in his eyes. If you are thrilled with this turn of destiny, leave a comment here stating which state you are following us from. It's wonderful to know that our synergy transcends so many borders across the country. When Kunle hung up the phone, he looked at Amina with pure venom. He extended his open hand out the window. It's done, he declared, breathless. Femi will be released before nightfall. Now hand me the flash drive and disappear. Amina looked at the executive's extended hand. She smiled faintly, a sad smile, but loaded with ancestral wisdom. She closed her hand, hiding the flash drive in her paint-stained palm. The streets taught me many things, Kunle, she said calmly, but the most important lesson was never to trust the word of someone who wears a suit. I won't hand you anything. Despair took over his face. He tried to open the car door, but Amina stepped aside, maintaining a safe distance. I'm going up to that building and handing this evidence to Barrister Olajide, she informed, pointing to the dark granite building. He will keep it in a secure vault. If you try anything against Femi, or if you try to retaliate, Barrister Olajide will send copies to all the country's newspapers and to the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission. Kunle froze. The checkmate was delivered. Amina had not only guaranteed the freedom of the man she loved, but had also created a lifelong insurance policy against his family's malice. You will spend the rest of your life knowing that your entire empire is in the hands of a girl from under the flyover, she concluded, putting the flash drive back in her backpack. Don't dare cross our path again. Without waiting for a response, Amina turned her back. She walked with firm steps towards the revolving door of the commercial building. Kunle's security men didn't make a single move to stop her. They knew the war had been lost right there, in the middle of the hot asphalt. The elevator ride up to the 10th floor seemed to last an eternity. Amina's body ached with exhaustion, and the adrenaline began to subside, leaving a profound fatigue to take over every muscle. But she needed to finish the mission. Barrister Olajide was an elderly gentleman with white hair and an impeccable posture. When the secretary announced the entry of a shabby young woman into the elegant office, he almost called security. But Amina spoke Femi's name, and the doors to the main office opened immediately. She told him everything, without circumlocution, without exaggerating or diminishing the facts. The veteran lawyer, who had been an intimate friend of Femi's father, listened in absolute silence. He took the flash drive and the notebook with reverence. You know, my friends, it's in times of greatest despair that we discover who our true friends are. Share this story with that person who stood by your side when the rest of the world turned its back on you. Let's spread gratitude this early morning. Barrister Olajide made the necessary calls. He confirmed that Kunle had already moved to cancel the arrest warrant. The lawyer used his own prestige to ensure Femi was released from the state police station, without any criminal record being generated. It was 4 hours of agonizing wait in the lawyer's meeting room. Amina refused coffee, water, or food. She merely sat in a comfortable leather chair, staring fixedly out the large glass window that overlooked the city. The sun was already beginning to hide behind the tall buildings when the office door was abruptly opened. Amina quickly raised her head. Femi stood in the doorway. He looked exhausted. His hair was disheveled, his face haggard, and his expensive clothes were rumpled and dirty from the police station dust. But his eyes shone with an indescribable light as they found the young woman in the chair. He said nothing. There was no need for words. The silence between them had already been broken so many times and in such profound ways that human vocabulary seemed too small for that moment. Femi walked to her and dropped to his knees on the carpeted floor. He wrapped his arms around Amina's slender waist and buried his face in her stomach. The 38-year-old man, owner of countless fortunes, cried like a relieved child. Amina caressed his hair with trembling hands. Her tears fell onto his face, washing away the pain, fear, and injustice of that endless nightmare. They were safe. They were finally free. The resumption of their lives was not an instant fairy tale. Real life never is. The dust of the battle took a few weeks to settle completely. Femi decided not to return to the company. He permanently relinquished the presidency to the board, demanding only that Kunle be removed from key decisions. With the constant threat of the evidence stored in Barrister Olajide's vault, the family had no choice but to accept the conditions. The former millionaire gave up much of his fortune, keeping only what was necessary for a peaceful life without upheavals. The empty luxury and stressful meetings gave way to slow mornings and reflective afternoons. They returned to the old art studio in the old part of the city, this time not as fugitives, but as official residents. The dusty space was carefully renovated, maintaining the creative soul the place had always had. Amina did not return to the streets. She found in that studio the home that destiny had denied her for so many years. The yellow light of dawn now only served to illuminate the large canvases she painted with mastery. Her talent, once hidden in dirty charcoal under the flyover, blossomed with oil paints and immense canvases. She did not paint happy pictures to adorn rich living rooms. She painted the raw reality, the beauty of survival, and the strength of the invisible. Femi became her pillar. He managed the discreet sale of her works, ensuring that her art gained the respect it deserved, without ever selling out to cheap elitism. His love was solidified in the smell of strong coffee and fresh paint, spread across the wooden floor. Our early morning is drawing to a close, and the silence outside seems even deeper. If there's one lesson this story tattoos on our hearts, it's that no one is anyone's savior. True love isn't about pulling someone out of a hole. True love is when two wounded people decide to sit on the edge of the abyss together and build a new bridge, plank by plank. Femi did not save Amina from misery with his naira. It was Amina's relentless courage that saved Femi from his own cowardice and an empty life. Destiny crosses improbable paths because it knows that some wounds only heal when they find mirrors. Never underestimate the power of a second chance. Never judge someone's strength by the clothes they wear or the difficult story they carry on their back. Thank you very much for staying with me until this final moment. Your company makes all the difference for this voice to continue echoing through so many people's nights. If you've made it this far, leave a like to seal our meeting. I bid you farewell for now, but before turning off the microphone, I want to leave you with a question to ponder as you try to sleep. If you could rescue the version of yourself that was lost and afraid in the past, what would you say to her today? Leave your answer in the comments. Sleep in peace, breathe deeply, and always remember that tomorrow the sun rises again to illuminate our new beginnings.